Welcome to the Western New York Athletics High School Football Weekly Show with Frank Wolf and Dick Gallagher, brought to you by Scroy Financial in West Seneca, Danny's Restaurant with 2 locations, 3715 Genesee Street in Cheektowaga and in Orchard Park on Abbott Road near the stadium, and G&G Fitness at 7350 Transit Road near Main Street in Amherst. Check them out on the web at livefit.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to High School Football Weekly. This is episode 9. I'm Frank Wolf from WNY Athletics, and I'm joined, of course, by Dick Gallagher from WGRZ High School Sports. Dick, what an amazing week 8 it was. The first week of the playoffs, a bye week for a couple, and then some other Monsignor Martin games going on. One up in Canada with St. Joe's heading up to Ontario, and then, of course, you had a few games here going on of importance. Well, one other game and one forfeit, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. But why don't we take a look at the highlights from Week 8, courtesy of our good buddy Tom Repicci from Prepstar. Those are some pretty cool highlights, man. I mean, he does a fantastic job. And, again, it's all the credit goes to Tom. But, again, those players making those exciting catches and tackles and everything else, it's fun to watch that stuff. You know, one of the big things that I'm getting blasted for is my large and small school rankings. So we might as well get right into that. They're not sponsored by anybody. Nobody wants to admit that they want to get behind this. They don't want to put their brand on this, but I will. Large school rankings after Week 8 are as follows. I'm going to go with the small schools first, Dick, if you don't mind. Number 10, Olean Huskies. The Olean Huskies make the list for the first time this year. Number 9, CSP. Number 8, Cheektowaga. Man, they fell. Number 7, Pioneer. Number 6, the Portville Panthers. Number 5, Albion. Number 4, the Wilson Lakemen. Number 3, from Class D, Franklinville, Ellicottville. Number 2, Western New York Maritime Health Sciences. And number 1, yet again, Southwestern, the Trojans, holding on to that number 1 spot for our small school rankings. In the large schools, number 10, also making their first appearance, Grand Island, the Vikings, have made the list. Number 9, West Seneca West, the Indians are back in the large school rankings. Number 8, McKinley. Number 7, Lancaster. Number 6, South Park. Number 5, Orchard Park. Number 4, Jamestown. Number 3, Canisius. Number 2, St. Joe's. Number 1, St. Francis. And I'm sure I'm going to hear a mouthful and get an earful from some people around Western New York that don't like my rankings, but that's too bad. Do your own rankings. We'll see how people like those. But anyways, you got to have a little guts to put your name on those
It's
things.
your top 10, small schools, large schools. They can also do a top 10.
Absolutely. I don't see any of the large schools, publics, beating those private schools. I apologize, or I'm not going to apologize for that. That's the way I feel. I just don't. I mean, Canisius lost. They lost to St. Francis, who's arguably, really is no argument. They are the best team in Western New York right now. Offensively, defensively, their line play. St. Joe's is right behind them, and then we're going to have an awesome game in just a couple weeks. St. Joe's and Canisius round 2. That's going to be an amazing game. Any way you slice it.
Yeah, the best example, I think, when you take a look at the private schools, particularly the 3 big schools in League A from Monsignor Martin, is West New York Maritime is dominating every opponent. They're undefeated, and they're outscoring their opponents 3-1. They lost to Canisius 40-0. That speaks volumes related to the competition that Canisius plays during the course of the season, because they cannot get more games with Section 6.
And how about the dismantling that St. Joe's did of Bennett back in week 2? I mean, it wasn't even close. It was never a close game. It doesn't matter who didn't play in the first quarter. You had 3 more quarters to get back into it, and you couldn't. St. Joe's absolutely destroyed Bennett, and that's why these public schools don't want to play the privates. It is a little bit embarrassing, and you could say the recruiting thing. I think some of it, sometimes it's excuses, and maybe there is some validity to it. We know there was at one point, but at some point it would be nice to see those privates play the publics. And, maybe if the publics put up a game, they would keep some of those players. Jerry Smith said it perfectly just a few weeks ago. If you run a good program, you treat the kids with respect, they're not going to leave. They're going to stay with you. Now, sometimes there are circumstances that, for one reason or another, a family has to, leave a certain area and they don't like the public school they're assigned to. Maybe they will go to a private school. That happens. But at the same time, how often do private schools lose players to public schools for academics, financial reasons, or it's just not a good fit? Take a kid out of public school and put him in private. That's tough. I tried it. I went from a public school my entire elementary life to a private school. I didn't fit there. It wasn't a fit for me. I went right back to the public school. So it doesn't work for everybody. But you never hear a private school coach complain that one of their players left to go back to the public schools.
I think what I'd like to see is for the section to sit down with Monsignor Martin, particularly scheduling games for Timon and Cardinal O'Hara, and St. Mary's, mainly because when you just take a look at when they're having to play the teams in League A from Monsignor Martin, they're not games. It's just filling voids in scheduling, and I'd like to see them be able to do that. And I think one of the biggest things, too, was Timmy Delaney every year played a Catholic school right from the beginning, no problem.
Yes, Timmy Delaney went over and above
they won a state championship.
Yes.
He was the outstanding defensive player in lineman, and then the next thing you know, he winds up at Timon. And Tim said, "You'll never see me playing again." So sometimes you create your own, monster.
Yeah, and honestly, I have no problem with what Timmy did. He did it for as long as until you burned him. You burned him. And that was his best player. And, I can understand Timmy's frustration. I was there when he first played St. Joe's that week, 6 days after the player left. Timmy was hot. And I think anybody else would have been too. And it was totally understandable. But, Timmy has to do what's best for his program. And it's very rare someone leaves South Park, if at all. That might have been the only case. Kids love playing for Timmy, and that's why they're loyal to him and they stay there. It's very rare. And I think a lot of those coaches that have carved out their niche at certain schools, like Jerry Smith at St. Francis, Rich at Canisius, Mike Mamalotti at Will North, those kinds of guys, they've earned the trust of their players for many, many years because they treat their players the right way, they do things the right way, and it's very rare you see a player leave one of those schools. It happens, but it's very, very rare. Let's get back to a couple other things. We got the Connolly Cup Top Performers. We got the Trench Trophy nominees. Let's take a look at the Week 8 nominees and top performers. Welcome back to High School Football Weekly. And if you've been watching or involved with high school football over the course of the last 2 or 3 decades, you may recognize these magazines that my good buddy Dick Gallagher was solely responsible for. Along with you had some help putting these together, right? Paul Hutzler?
There's a lot of people behind the scenes helped being able to publish that paper, particularly during the high school football season, where it would be a lot of time and effort just to be able to do it, but it was well worth it.
I noticed 2 names. I was looking briefly through these papers, which I would love to have. I mean, we have Mark Adair's his high school football weekly paper that comes out now. It's all internet form, which he's always done a tremendous job with that and continues to do, just not in print form anymore, but is available. If you're interested in getting a subscription to Mark's magazine, it's real easy to do. Tag us in a photo, and I'll get you hooked up with Mark so you can get his weekly magazine, which is the best football magazine around, especially with high school football in this particular area. No one does a better job than Mark. I'll get you hooked up with him. Just send me a direct message on Facebook or at Twitter at Wolf3328. But Dick, the area and these players that were featured in this and teams, they owe you a debt of gratitude. There's 2 names that jumped out at me right away when I was going through this February 2004 edition. Ty Harper from Fredonia and Pizanka from Iroquois, those head coaches. Well, Ty Harper was at Fredonia at the time. Pizanka was at Lancaster. They are now coaches. And those are guys that probably really were taken back when they saw themselves as honorable mentions in your magazine, and that lit a fire under them to continue doing what they do. And now they went from being great football players in high school to now great coaches in our area, and we're indebted to those guys, and they're indebted to you for recognizing them at such a young age, because that is important. And that's what WNY Athletics do, is we try to highlight these kids, these players, athletes, and of course their coaches and their programs. That's all we're trying to do. So it's a lot of fun. And, we're just riding your coattails here. You know that. I've told you we're riding your coattails.
Well, you accomplished what you set out to do with Western New York Athletics and giving more recognition to high school football, high school sports, boys and girls throughout Western New York. So that's a tribute to your organization, and just keep on doing what you're doing.
We are. It's a big mountain to climb. We're not there yet. There's a long way to go. We did reveal, we talked before we were going to go on that we're going to come up with a new award, so to speak, for the defensive players, and you seem to like this Mount Crushmore idea. I might have heard that somewhere along the lines, but no, there's no award for that Mount Crushmore, and the idea is I think I'm going to get 6 players, one from the Monsignor Martin, then from Class AA all the way down to D, 1 player from each, get them all in either a shirt or a trophy, and just have it called Mount Crushmore, and you just have the kid's name, the year they played, where they play, what league, and then just get 6 of those trophies and just hand them out to those players. That would be a pretty cool trophy to get at an awards banquet.
1 would be unique, 2 would be costly, but...
Don't tell my wife. She doesn't watch the show, by the way. She told me.
Well, he didn't. My wife does not watch the show, but when you look at having 7 grandchildren, and they played a total of 45 team sports, when you have 3 children and the 2 boys played a number of sports, we're brought up with that, and when you go to 8 or 9 different schools, which my brother and I and family did because my father kept on moving around. We lived in the South. We lived in Boston. We lived in Bath, New York. We saw the country the way that it is now. And I think one of the things that I'll always remember is people who take the time to recognize high school sports, but particularly the coaches who take the time to spend an awful lot of time, not for the money, but just for being able to help educate and steer kids to a more fruitful life.
Couldn't agree with you more. Saturday, December 28th, the Dick Gallagher football banquet.
It's West New York High School Sports Football Banquet.
All right.
This is the 33rd year, which is hard to believe.
Dennis asked me, was I born when you first started? I was about 11 years old. And I made my first trip there last year, and I don't think there's another banquet quite like it. For all the banquets I've been a part of, I've been a part of a lot of different sports organizations, been to hundreds of banquets over the years. That is by far my favorite one. And Dennis is here from the Connolly Cup. The Connolly Cup banquet is also awesome, too. There's a lot of anticipation for that one. A lot of people are just kind of running around like, who's going to get it? We know one of these 10 guys here is going to win that Connolly Cup, and it's always very dramatic the way Dennis and Stu put that together and announce it. It's awesome. And that, I believe, is the first Saturday in December. Dennis, you're here. December 7th this year. December 7th. You know the history there.
Then the trench is,
Yes.
I think, December 9th
Yeah.
or 10th.
Yeah. So those are another two great football-based banquet awards. So the dates are out for that, and just make sure you clear your calendar, especially if you should be so lucky as to have your name called and get that invite. So we're going to return to WNY Athletics High School Football Weekly. We're going to cover the Monsignor Martins all the way from Class A down to D for Section 6. We'll be back in just a few moments after a word from our sponsors. UBMD Orthopedics. We got G&G Fitness, LiveFit.com. Who else we got? West Turf Family of Dealerships, and, of course, Scroy Financial, my buddies out there in West Seneca. Plan, protect, invest. We'll be back after a few words from those sponsors.
We have hundreds of square feet of physical therapy in multiple locations. And with the physical therapy, we also have a strength and conditioning bridge program that can help athletes kind of specifically fine-tune their abilities and getting them back to specific sports. For people who are in tune to working with athletes of all different levels, from high school all the way up to the professional teams we take care of. This is a service that's offered through the UB Well program.
Welcome back to High School Football Weekly, Episode 9. Dick Gallagher, Frank Wolf here with you. Thank you for spending some time with us. We're going to get into the Monsignor Martin division of high school football, and this segment is sponsored by Logistics Plus of Buffalo, New York. You can go to logisticsplus.net, send them an email, buffalo@logisticsplus.net, for all your transportation, trucking, and supply chain needs. Dick, getting right into the Monsignor Martin, pretty easy schedule. O'Hara at least had a forfeit. This time their opponent forfeited, so they get a 2-0 win there. But that's one less week of film for those players. So that is that's costly. You got these kids from O'Hara that have been going, balls to the wall since all year pretty much in late August. And now they don't have as much film as some of these other teams. So hopefully O'Hara can get those numbers back up. This is not on them this week, but there are other weeks where, unfortunately, because of their low numbers, they weren't able to play some games. The big one, obviously, Canisius St. Francis, we'll talk about in just a moment. Monsignor Martin St. Joe's traveled up to Chamonix. We talked about that in the opening, and they beat that Chamonix team 54-8 or 54-14, something along those lines. So that was a big win for St. Joe's and a nice trip for them to go up there and showcase their team and maybe even do some recruiting, get some players from Ontario to come down and take a look at St. Joe's. It's not uncommon to see Canadian players playing at some of these private institutions. Bishop Timon, big win over St. Mary's, 19-7. That was a Friday night game, and big win for Timon. And it gives them that top seed in the small division. So now O'Hara and St. Mary's will duke it out for the right to play Timon at UB, which I believe is November 16th. if they even want to play that game. I hear that they're leaving it up to the small schools to, if you don't have enough players and you don't want to play, you don't have to. But I believe they're putting it on, letting them make the decision. And I hope they do play, because that is a good recruiting tool for those schools, even if, I'm not talking going outside the boundaries, but what I am suggesting is for those kids that were thinking about playing football next year that aren't playing right now, that are freshmen or sophomores, having the opportunity to play at a venue like UB Stadium is pretty cool, and maybe that'll attract some of those kids to play. So I hope they do play that game there. So I'm on board with that. Canisius St. Francis Friday night, that was heard live on it was seen on the NFHS broadcast. St. Francis with a big win over Canisius, 38-27. Dick, your thoughts on the Red Raiders prevailing over the Crusaders in that game?
Well, I think when you take a look at the outstanding players on both sides, and it was a game that changed multiple times. Its momentum was different at times, but Jake Ritz has passed for over 2,000 yards this season. Last year, he passed for 3,600 yards, 3,300 yards, and then 6 touchdowns. This year, he's thrown for 24 touchdowns. By the time he's done, he's only a junior, he's going to set all Western New York passing records. And then if you look at Jenselic, Xavier, and what he was able to, I think he was 279 yards rushing. And they have just an outstanding line, and Jerry gave a lot of credit to the offensive line and opened up the holes. And someone that's been under the radar screen, Antonio Corsi, he's 6'2", 210. He's only a junior. He's got ability to play the next level. And he had, I think, 107 or 110 yards and caught 7 passes. And if you just took a look at it, and then when you took a look at Tyler Baker, he had 105 yards rushing, I think a couple of hundred yards passing. And he's been an offensive firepower since he came and won the battle to be able to be the quarterback for the Crusaders.
Yeah, and he's over that 1,200-yard passing mark. He's known as an excellent runner as well, but he's having a pretty good year at Canisius, 1,258 yards with 12 touchdowns. And Ritz is sitting at 2,195, the only 2,000-yard passer we have in Western New York right now. Jack Sharp from Orchard Park is at 1,855, so there's a good chance he gets over 2,000. I don't know if Mikkel Hepburn from South Park will get there. He's sitting at 1,574. He would need a really impressive game this coming weekend in order to reach that threshold. They just want to win. I'm sure he can care less about getting to 2,000 yards, but that would be a nice feather in his cap if he can get there. He has tossed 19
he's also a junior, so he's got another year.
He's
along with Ritz. And then if you look at Callum Withers and Tyler Baker, also underclassmen, Monsignor Martin's got some outstanding quarterbacks the next few years.
Absolutely. So where are we with Monsignor Martin? We know that Timon is going to wait on O'Hara and St. Mary's, but St. Joe's and Canisius are going to do battle again, I believe, next week at St. Joe's for round 2. And as you know, Dick, it's very, very tough to beat a team 2 times in the same season, regardless of where you are and standings, wins, losses, and that sort of thing. Very difficult to beat a team 2 times in the same season. Now, I'm hearing Canisius does have some injuries, especially in that linebacker position. Could have a couple of premier starters out, or at least limited in mobility and things of that nature. With that being said, do you like St. Joe's? And we could talk about this more next week, of course, but I think at this point, the momentum at least is with St. Joe's, coming off a huge win last week, doing what they did, having a huge win over Chaminade this week, having the win earlier in the season over Canisius. They should have a pretty good handle on things.
Alan Withers, junior, but just getting better every game. And against Chaminade, he had 3 touchdown passes, over 200 yards passing, and also ran for a touchdown. And then if you look at their defense, they played outstanding defense. One of the things about this Marauder team is they have a lot of kids that are really under the radar screen and unsung. And Vincent Lamayo is one wide receiver. He's been outstanding. Jimmy Scott, he's only a sophomore, but he's been outstanding. So if you take a look, it'll be whenever the private schools play each other, particularly the big schools, smash mouth football at its best, and it's a fun game to watch. Just like the game last week with Crusaders and the Red Raiders was a good one.
When you're playing St. Joe's, who would you say the one guy is you just can't take your eyes off of? Is there a particular player there?
Yeah, I think Micah Brown.
Okay. All right. I didn't want to say it. I wanted to hear you say it. But that kid on the field is as dangerous as anybody we have in Western New York, especially with a football in his hands.
What I don't understand, because I don't know, which was a couple of games ago, I don't know whether Withers was injured, but Micah threw for three touchdowns, ran for 3 touchdowns. He was outstanding last year with his athleticism as a quarterback, but with Callum coming in and moved him to be able to play defense and then also wide receiver. So, as long as they stay healthy, they're going to be a force.
All right, we're going to come back in just a little bit with the Section 6 teams. That'll do it for Monsignor Martin. Shout out to Pete Schneider. I think he's doing an excellent job out there for the Monsignor Martins, and he's always a good guy to talk to, and I'm looking to have a couple conversations with him this week about what's going on around Monsignor Martin. We'll be back in just a few moments after a word from our sponsor. Thank you.
Hey, Josh Allen.
Hey, thanks for coming by.
Big fan.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all about that teamwork.
Yeah, that's West Her. Get the right people, working together, making connections. In fact, show me what you got. I'm going long.
Really?
Woo. Made me work for it, but anything worth doing.
Listen, I know you're good at this TV deal, but maybe you should try the football thing.
Welcome back to High School Football Weekly, Episode 9. Dick Gallagher and Frank Wolf, you got us in your office or in your home or wherever you're watching this in your car. Thank you very much for continuing to watch our show each week. We really appreciate it, and we thank you for your support of our show, what we're trying to do for high school football in Western New York. Dick, doing this for as long as you have and for as little time as I have, we run across athletes that you're going to remember for a long time. There's just kids that just are extremely polite, fun to watch, and just play the game the right way. And they do everything they can to be a good teammate. They do everything they could to be coachable and things of that nature. And one of those kids is hanging up his cleats after their game last week, and that's Connor Desiderio from Maryvale. And, you know what? Tom Repicci put this nice highlight film together for us. Tom from Prepstar, who has worked with Connor for the last few years. Why don't we take a look at those highlights real quick, and then I'll just give you my thoughts on Connor. welcome back. And that was pretty impressive what Connor's been able to do the last 4 years as the starter there at Maryvale. Got the chance to play at New Era Field, and he really raced onto the scene with his shootouts with Cheat DeWog over the years, going up against Bartnick. Eric Bartnick was a Connolly Cup favorite finalist just a few years ago, and taking Maryvale on his back along with Rashad Law and a couple of those guys, getting all the way to New Era. They went right down to the final play, had a chance to win there. He is one of those kids that you're going to remember long after he's done playing at Maryvale, because he was just such a good kid to talk to, always willing. I went out to their game against Lakeshore last Thursday night, and I knew that was going to be his last game, and he was just a few yards shy of breaking Corey Shem's records for offensive yards, which he did do. He passed it. He went over that threshold, and he got a nice email from Corey congratulating him on doing that, which tells you what type of guy Corey was back in his playing days and what kind of guy he is now. And we salute him for his service. He's a great kid. Has his jersey retired there at Maryvale, and I asked Connor after the game, I go, one of these days, you may see your jersey up next to his. And he just couldn't believe it. He just didn't want to even talk about it. He was, yeah, it'd be nice, but, he's so focused on being a good teammate and, everything else that comes along with being a high school athlete, that he can really care less about the awards and the acknowledgments and that sort of thing. That kid, after the game, just wanted to be alone on the field by himself. So, everyone's getting ready to leave. The fans are clearing out. Teammates go in the locker room. Connor goes in the locker room. He comes out 20 minutes later, just walks out in his flip-flops, and he's got his spikes draped over his shoulders, and he walks out there, and I said, hey, so you want to talk real quick? And he goes, yeah, I just got to do a couple things first. And, one of them, he threw his cleats up on the goalpost. I don't know if he's going to get in trouble for loitering or not at Maryvale. But, he wanted to put his cleats up on the field goal post as a way of saying, I'm done. I've left my mark here on the football field. I'm done. But then he just disappeared onto the field. It was pitch black. There were no lights. And he just went out to God knows where to do whatever, just to kind of reflect on his last 4 years as the quarterback at Maryvale in his career. And I just wanted to leave him alone. You know what? We could talk another time. So I let him go, but I have no idea where he went to. But I know he went back on that field to just kind of maybe laugh, cry, or who knows what.
He is a class act. He'll be very successful in his life. He's going to be at Lonnie's and playing baseball. But one of the stories I heard recently was that there was a kid that got injured at Maryvale, and he had that young boy be one of the captains for a game so he could enjoy that moment even though he wasn't playing. And instead of Desiderio, being that captain, this other player was able to just enjoy that moment. And that's the type of class act that Connor is and always will be, because you don't change individuals like that.
I mean, I offered him a job that night with WNY Athletics right away, because I feel that's wrong. He's going to be successful, whatever he does, so hopefully one day he's successful with us. We'll have to wait and see. He didn't take me up on the offer. He said, I got to finish out my high school year. I said, yeah, we're talking after college. You go do what you got to do at St. Bonaventure, but you call us when you're done. But I mean, that we extend those that courtesy to a lot of kids. He's just one that I wanted to highlight on this show because we do appreciate everything that kid did for high school football in Western New York, and especially that Maryvale program. I know all those guys are extremely proud of him. Why don't we start talking about double A's, though? Enough about Connor. We're going to get into double A's, and it was one heck of a week. Opening playoffs. Some of those games, Jamestown hosted Frontier and did what they had to do. They're moving on into week 2. Orchard Park did what they needed to do in defeating Hutch Tech once again at OP. So Lancaster in a tight one against Clarence, but they do weather that storm and they win round 2. And they're going to be heading down to Jamestown Strider Field, which I think is the best press box in all of Western New York for football games. That's just awesome down there. And then on Saturday, it was Niagara Falls at Bennett for the second straight week, and I was at that game, and Bennett won. Tough to watch. That was a very tough game to watch, and I'm going to leave it at that. But in that game, we saw Dejae Perry probably for the last time. My heart goes out to that kid because he was playing through a number of injuries this year. And still, with those injuries and through that pain, was one of the best football players we got to watch all season. And both sides of the ball.
He's over 1,000 yards rushing. I think he averaged, like he did last year, 10 yards a carry, 10 or 11 touchdowns. But unfortunately, I think his season's over. And if you take a look at how he played the game, he was one of the more physical players I've watched in recent years. And he wasn't about just dancing and prancing. He just played smash mouth football. So it'd be interesting to see how the Tigers do against Orchard Park.
Yeah, and they will be without Justin Campbell too.
Right.
For one reason or another. We'll let that go. Orchard Park, and next week I was going to host Bennett for the second time this season. The first time it was all Orchard Park. I don't see how that will go any other way this weekend out in Orchard Park for the Quakers. I see them coming out on top once again. We've talked about some of the better quarterbacks in this area. You can't really have that discussion without including Jack Sharp, who has been very good for OP this year. Just until a few weeks ago, he had 1,500 yards after his first, 5 games of the year. Now he's sitting at 1,855 with 24 touchdowns. So Orchard Park's in good hands. They have Mike Pataki back. He got to play. And I saw them all at All High Stadium Saturday watching for their opponent. Good kids. I don't see how Orchard Park loses that game.
I agree, and particularly without Bennett having Campbell and Perry, who together form one of the top running backs duos, not just in West New York, but in the state. And when you lose 2 players like that on both sides of the ball, you lose a lot. And I think that when Orchard Park has won 14 sectional championships, they would like a 15th. Craig Dana and the coaching staff and the players have done a good job. And I have to think OP's going to be able to make it to the 23rd appearance for the sectional championship.
Well, they won't have far to go. They could drive there backwards.
It's a university of Orchard Park.
His name's escaping me, but he wears number 44. He's one of the running backs. Sucks, I can't remember his name right now. But anyways, he's a force to be reckoned with too. And watch out for that number 44. You're going to hear his name quite a bit. I can't tell you who it is right now, but keep your eyes on number 44 from Orchard Park. I like him a lot. And it's good to see their kicker was back too, Hollander, who missed...
Hollander,
yeah.
Tom Hollander.
Yeah, I like him a lot. Lancaster at Jamestown. This is a game that did not happen during the regular season, but Lancaster's got their hands full. There's a number of athletes down there at Jamestown that are ready to take their team to the next level. Standing in their way is the 3 straight winning Section 6 titles for Lancaster. They've won 3 straight. They're the only thing standing in the way of Jamestown reaching the stadium. That's going to be a dynamite game.
Jamestown has 31 players on its roster, 22 are underclassmen, and you look at how the Red Raiders have done during the season. Each game they got better and better. Each game it's almost been a different player being highlighted, and they have a freshman quarterback, Trey Drake. They have an outstanding 2-way player in Jalen Butera. And then if you take a look at the Tonkin brothers and Simeon Leeper, they're going to be a force to deal with. Lancaster's lost 2 games, each by a point. They know what it takes. They got an outstanding coaching staff, but I think that will be one of the top games, and both teams will play to the final whistle.
One kid that's really been coming on for Lancaster is that Nick Castellana. Been hearing his name called quite a bit offensively. And of course Connor Mahoney Marshner, another kid on defense, looking really good. Tommy Sullivan is the kid from Orchard Park. Thank you, Dennis. Tommy Sullivan, number 44. Watch out for that guy. But speaking of Lancaster, they do have some experience there. They've got Eric Rupp, the head coach, and he's got a lot of help on the sideline as well. He's got some good coaching down there, good positional coaches that he can trust. And now he's on top of the catwalk up there with the cameras coaching from up top. We'll have to see what they can do, but they're going to have their hands full with Jamestown. It's a long drive. I don't know if they're bringing their band too. Would they bring their band down, their marching band? Because watching those two bands go at it could be worth the price of admission too.
Well, if you look at Jamestown, their complex is outstanding, and they were one of the original turf fields back in the 80s, and the coaching staff is also outstanding. They've won a state championship back, I think it's in 2015. Same coaching staff as now with Tom Langworthy. But to me, it's like, who's going to avoid the turnover? Who's going to win the battle of turnovers? Who's going to win the battle of the trenches? And who's going to avoid the penalties? Because both of those teams have been penalized probably more this year than last year, and they can't afford that.
Absolutely true. I think it comes down to special teams and defense in that game. We'll have to see who prevails. I'm not going to make any predictions right now, but I don't think that game will be on TV. I thought I heard Spectrum was going out to that Orchard Park Bennett game, and not that those kids don't deserve to be on TV, they do. But if I ran Spectrum, there's no way I'd be at that game this weekend. That's going to be a one-sided affair. I would send that crew down to Jamestown for that Lancaster game, but I don't get paid by Spectrum.
Can't agree.
If I made the decisions, I'd be heading down. Stop at Davidson's first for a fish sandwich or a hamburger. That's what I would do.
I'm not a connoisseur of food, so.
Well, hey, we're not going to waste half an hour talking about that. But anyways, we're going to be back in just a few moments. We're going to get into Class A after a word from our sponsors.
Why do you exercise? To look better? To feel better? To drop a few pounds? To train for an event? To defy age? Or to keep your ability to say yes to the things you love to do? Whatever motivates you, G&G Fitness Equipment is here to get you there. Treadmills, ellipticals, rowers, bikes, home gyms, and accessories. We'll pair you with the right equipment, teach you how to use it, and be there every step of your fitness journey. G&G Fitness. Your goal is our goal.
Welcome back to High School Football Weekly. I am Frank Wolf from WNY Athletics, joined by, of course, Dick Gallagher from WGRZ High School Sports. Dick, we're talking about the Class A's now of Section 6, and, of course, the Class A's, 2 divisions, and they're just finished with the crossover games. Got one more left, it looks like, before they head to New Era Field, and those are 4 awesome playoff games, to say the least. Class A is brought to you by Prepstar. Tom Repicci, give him a call. You know how to find him. Prepstar. Let's start with that West Seneca West Star Point game, because that seemed to be the one that we could see coming with all the injuries to Star Point. We just thought that West Seneca West was going to pull that one out, and they did.
I think that would be, if you take a look at West Seneca West and look at the record that they have in the last 3 years, including the state championship, Mike Pistola and the coaching staff have done an exceptional job. And if you really look at just the defense, when you look at Liam, Sure, Mike Linsky, Dylan Weir, then look at Isaiah Simmons running the ball and what he's been able to accomplish as a sophomore, they're a force to dealt with. And one of the things Mike said at the beginning of the season, it would depend on the culture of his team on how successful. And I think that they've been able to have a wonderful culture. And it'll be just, given that he had an injury to his non-passing shoulder, Liam, hopefully will be, ready to go. But he's a force on the line, but he's also a force carrying the ball. He's so big, and he gets more yardage, I think, sometimes running than he does passing.
Shire was big 2 years ago. I remember, I think it was Francis Beck was down there, and I said, "You've got to get a picture of Myers get down there to their training camp and just get a picture of Myers throwing passes. And he took a couple of photos and he sent one to me, and I think we even tweeted it out, but it wasn't Myers, it was Shire. And I'm like, look at the size of that kid. I'm like, Myers grow his hair out? Because this kid had pretty long hair. Like, I think he got Shire. I don't think that's Myers. But, yeah, he was big 2 years ago as a sophomore. 3 years ago as a sophomore. And to me, he's one of those kids that I talked about this earlier in the year. He's definitely one of those kids that I really admire because he kind of didn't, squawk about being relegated to backup quarterback. You've seen a number of quarterbacks this year alone that because they were not named the starters left their schools to go try playing quarterback somewhere else, stealing other kids' jobs, so to speak. And some of those kids are out of the playoffs right now, so, comes back to bite you sometimes. But the big thing is with Shire, he stuck it out. He didn't quit on those kids. He didn't take off for another school in which he could have probably been a starter. He stayed with West Seneca West, and he stuck it out, and he battled hard, and he got that job. He earned that job the old-fashioned way by beating out the competition and not squawking, not having mommy and daddy make phone calls for you. This kid stuck it out, and I take my hat off to that kid. I like West Seneca West. I do. I like them a lot, and I'm not surprised they won this past week. The only thing about that whole game is Kevin Arrow is now going to coach his last game stuck on number 99. But I don't think Al would trade that career for anything.
Well, when you take a look, I think it's 19 or 20 years that he's been coaching, and what he brought to the table just as being a class act, very humble, and very advocating for his team and coaching staff. And it's unfortunate he didn't reach the 100 club. But when you take a look at it, he reached the club that has a lot of credibility and a lot of people admire, and that's sometimes better than the 101.
Yes.
100 win.
I agree. I think he would agree with that. How about that South Park Williamsville North game? The Spartans really gave the Sparks quite a scare.
Well, you mean the South Park?
Yeah.
The Sparks.
Sparks, yeah.
Right. If you look at the seventh game in the season, Williamsville South led South Park 7-6 at halftime, then lost 28-7. I was surprised. If you looked at asked me what surprises, I thought was the way that South Park is dominated and only beat Williamsville North 14-7. And Tommy Delaney said that they just had an excellent game plan, and particularly with their defense. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays up. But when you're looking at who the South Park's going to have to play, Grand Island, who's a team of destiny, who's there on a 4-4 record. But then when you take a look at what's happened on that campus and school, when you look at that Dean Santorio's father passed away in the funeral and wake and everything else going along with the heartache and of that loss to the team, and yet the Vikings, right from Gene Masters decades ago, Dean playing for Gene and also at Edinburgh, and it's almost like it's a team in destiny. So I think that the Sparks better be ready to play, because what Grand Island has, they don't have speed merchants. They've got kids with big hearts, who just don't know how to lose and just want to be able to make it to the stadium again.
It's been a while. The other game, Class A, Sweet Home McKinley. And McKinley was put to the test by Jeremy Zimmer's crew at Sweet Home. They did they played them tough. Were they not down in that game early, and then Sweet Home made a nice comeback? So it speaks to the resolve of that team. Last year, that Sweet Home team, they would have quit. We saw it against South Park last year. I mean, they were injured, and they just didn't look like they wanted to be there. Here they are, down 14-0 in their first playoff game in quite some time, down to a team that's been beating everybody in A. And for them to come back and claw their way back into that game, it speaks, volumes about the coaching staff there and how much those kids really wanted to win that game. So,
Jim?
again,
Jeremy
good job.
Zimmer has done a fantastic job, the coaching staff, and then going for two, and a few seconds left, in the game, and not getting there. It really was not well received by some of the Panther fans. But the bottom line is, when you take that you were winless in 2018, and now you made it to the playoffs, that just shows what the character of the kids that played. And Jamal Lucas is just an outstanding player. And then when you take a look at Tyler blocking the wide receiver, he's outstanding. And the Panthers are back. John Fowler smiling.
Yes. And if I was Jeremy, I would have gone for two all day against the team that hasn't lost all year. This was your shot to beat them on that play. They didn't get it done. Sometimes that happens.
At every level.
Yes. So, I mean, there's always going to be, armchair quarterback at the end of the game if something doesn't work the way it's supposed to. You should have done this, you should have done that. Either way, anybody that's watches this game for as long as they have would have probably understood, especially if you know how well you want to give McKinley's offense the ball back, you're going to lose all day. So Sweet Home did what they had to do. Hats off to Zimmer and the crew there for having the Stones to do what they tried to do. Grand Island beat my Kenmore West Blue Devils on Saturday. I was there for the first quarter of that game, and it was back and forth. I mean, Boys is definitely one of the top quarterbacks in Western New York, no question about it. He was fantastic. He scored the first touchdown of the game, a long touchdown run. Ben Mascala of Grand Island is also very good. I think Grand Island just maybe wanted it more collectively, and as you said, they're a team of destiny, so hats off to the Vikings and probably what was the best game of the day, maybe one of the best games of the day.
Boys had almost 397 yards running and passing and throwing for touchdowns, and he has to be one of the top candidates for all Western New York.
No pressure on us. I hear you. All right, so that'll do it for Class A. Well, you know what? Hang on real quick. Amherst. I want to bring them up. There are some games this weekend that we should mention. I know Amherst is playing Wednesday night. West Seneca East is at Will South. That's Wednesday, 6 p.m. That's the Chuck Funky Bowl. But Amherst is also playing Hutch Tech on Wednesday. We haven't talked a lot about these kids this year, and I wanted to make sure we brought their names up. The job that Nick O'Neill's done coming in for Amherst to play quarterback, he's got good numbers. He's a running quarterback, 851 total yards. He's averaging 7.5 yards per carry. He's got 10 rushing touchdowns. But Anthony McCarley, another senior, is perhaps one of the top players in the area. He rushed for 515 yards. He averaged just about 8 yards a carry, had 6 touchdowns, had another 4 touchdowns receiving, 382 yards there. And then defensively, McCarley had 3 interceptions. He also had 3 touchdowns on special teams. Returned 3 kicks. That's a kid that we're going to have to, you should pay attention to. And if you're available Wednesday night, I encourage you to go to Amherst and watch this kid play. It'll be the last time you get to see this kid. So I'll be heading out to Amherst to take a look at that kid with my own eyes because I heard nothing but good things, and that's someone I want to go see. So maybe I'll pick you up.
Well, St. Joe's would have loved to have had him because he transferred from St. Joe's to a senior year at Amherst, and he runs a 4.5 40, outstanding athlete, and he's like a rocket. So he's got a lot of staffs, and he should be also considered for all Western New York recognition.
And they made a nice push to try and get in the playoffs too.
Yep.
They came up with a big win shootout with Kenmore East. They did beat Sweet Home at a time when Sweet Home really needed to win a game. Sweet Home still got in the playoffs, but Amherst did beat them earlier in the year. They beat Albion, and then they finished up with a win against North Tonawanda. Angelo Bibbs, 22 tackles, 6 sacks, and a pick defensively for the Tigers. I'll be coming to see them on Wednesday. So that's what I want to make sure I gave those kids a shout-out. We're going to come back in just a few minutes. Let's hear from one of our sponsors, and we'll go into Class B.
We didn't get here by accident. It starts with a plan to protect your future, to invest in your future. It started with Scroy Financial. Plan, protect, invest. Scroy Financial.
We needed a plan to protect what matters most. By investing in our future, that all started with Scroy Financial. Plan, protect, invest. Scroy Financial.
Welcome back to High School Football Weekly. Dick, before we start talking about the Class B in particular, I want to make sure everyone knows Wednesday, besides Hutch Tech at Amherst, Lockport is going to NT Wednesday for a matchup game. Those Chuck Funky Bulls for Double A. Clarence hosting Niagara Falls Thursday at 6 p.m. And West Seneca East is heading to Will South. That's Wednesday at 6 p.m. Let's get into the Class Bs here if we can, Dick, and just some of the bigger games. Well, some of the bigger games. All playoff games. They're all big. Maritime gets by Iroquois 36-14 on Friday night. Pioneer with the big 31-28 win over Cheektowaga, a game that you saw on Spectrum. Albion gets by Tonawanda 17-14, and then on Saturday, Olean comes all the way up to Newfane and takes them down 26-24. So the Huskies are alive and well in the playoffs here.
And the way the Huskies got into the playoffs as far as being able to play the semifinals against Albion. Last play of the game, Gavin Culpus, outstanding two-way player. He's a wide receiver. Rayleigh Silvas is a sophomore quarterback. They connect on a 79-yard touchdown to win the game and then go on to play at the next level. Outstanding accomplishment. And we mentioned his name a few times, Nick Frederick-Angelo. He's been outstanding on both sides of the ball. It'll be interesting because, they're going against Albion, and Albion won by, I think it was 46-29. It was a shootout, and I believe it was at Albion. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Whoever wins, it's going to have a tough venue against Western Maritime or Pioneer. I watched Pioneer. Denton Tilley had a game and a half in one game. He had 4 pass knockdowns, 7 tackles, 3 or 4 sacks, recovered a couple of fumbles, forced a fumble. And then if you take a look,
well, hang on a second. Did he pass out popcorn at halftime?
Yes. And I didn't need it, but it was, next time I'll get it. But that game also was decided on the last play of the game. And when you take a look at it, the score at the end of the third period was 14-7. Final score 31-28. People forgot about defense in the fourth quarter. And Pioneer did what they needed to do, and Trade Hill was just outstanding in the clutch. And if you take the kid who transferred from Canisius, playing tight end, bulky, strong football player, he avoided, on the last play of the game, 2 tackles to get himself into the end zone to win the game.
It's Gabe Fisher. And we had talked about that in the opening segment, how tough it is to beat a team twice in the same season. I was at the first Cheektowaga Pioneer game. I thought Cheektowaga had more talent spread out. And I still believe they have a little more talent spread out. But at the same time, it's tough to beat a team twice in the same season. There was a lot of penalties in that first game. I don't know how many penalties there were on Friday, which negated big plays or first downs or what have you. But I thought Cheektowaga would have a tough time beating Pioneer the second time around, regardless of where that game was played. I just think Pioneer is a more disciplined team than Cheektowaga, and for that's why I wasn't surprised to see Pioneer pull that out. I can care less what plays were run at the end of the game. Plays are sent in to the players to execute. If you can't execute, there's a good chance you're not going to win. The coaches will always send in the play that they believe you're going to make. You're going to get those yards. You're going to get that score. And sometimes it just doesn't go. It just doesn't happen is the way you draw it up.
They won the battle of the trenches, particularly with Tilley. And they also dominated, I think, the clock, because one of the things that Cheektowaga didn't have was a running game, and I think that cost them big time. Aaron Smith had an excellent game. few touchdown passes. He's a big kid. He could run. But Pioneer, they came to play, and they deserve to win. It'll be interesting to see how they do against Western New York Maritime.
I remember before the season started, I guess I could say it now because his season's over, but during that scrimmage Saturday, I reached out to Connor Desiderio just to ask him, hey, what was your thoughts on some of these teams? You know, I knew he was going to give me a good answer. I knew he was going to give me an honest answer, and he said, I thought Pioneer was by far the most physical team there. I believe we're better, which you would expect a quarterback to say. But he said by far Pioneer was the most balanced and the most physical. And when you have a balanced team and a physical team, you could beat speed and you could beat athleticism, I believe, all day when you have those two characters. Olean, Albion is going to be an interesting game. That's Friday. And then, of course, this Pioneer, Western New York Maritime Health Sciences game. Health Sciences Maritime, that's going to be played at Johnny B. Wiley Friday at 7 p.m. Maybe they should send a camera crew there to that game. But you can't put Pioneer 2 weeks in a row. That's an interesting game. I don't know. I mean, Maritime has beaten everybody they've played this year except for Canisius, which they weren't expected to win anyways. But something about Pioneer that they're starting to really come on. I think they're going to bring them down, especially with how physical they are at the line of scrimmage. We'll have to wait and see. The Maritime team is very good. They've got a running back number 4. I believe it's John Williams that might have been injured in that first game against Cheektowaga, so we didn't see him until just a couple of weeks ago. He's a very strong, hard runner. Cheektowaga had a very strong, tough runner as well, a freshman there, Warburton. We'll have to see. I mean, this is a huge test for Pioneer, but I'm not going to be surprised if they pull off the quote-unquote upset here.
Well, Western New York Maritime also has an outstanding sophomore, Addison Copeland.
Great football player.
Who's also an outstanding football player, and he'll be playing Division I ball. And they've got tremendous athleticism. And if you take the fact that health sciences merged with Maritime this year, and that just added to their strength and speed and talent, and it doesn't surprise me that they are where they are, and wouldn't surprise me if they wound up at the stadium. But I think that Pioneer, particularly with their line play, could be the difference.
Okay, that's going to wrap it up for the Class B portion of our show. We'll be back in just a moment with Class C.
We have hundreds of square feet of physical therapy in multiple locations. And with the physical therapy, we also have a strength and conditioning bridge program that can help athletes kind of specifically fine-tune their abilities in getting them back to specific sports. For people who are in tune to working with athletes of all different levels, from high school all the way up to the professional teams we take care of, this is a service that's offered through the UB Well program.
Welcome back to High School Football Weekly. We're going to dive into the Class C portion of our show, and Class C is sponsored by the Sam Watts Special Teams Academy. Check out Sam Watts Special Teams Academy. Sammy was doing color work for us this last Saturday at the Kenmore West Grand Island game. Did a phenomenal job. In that game, you can listen back at it. If you go to mixler.com/WNY Athletics, check out the show reel, and you will be able to hear that game once again. Jake Fyock, Timmy Wegren, and Sam Watts all did that call for that game. They did a phenomenal job. Real quick, Class B Chuck Funky Bowl, Newport at Dunkirk, tomorrow night, Wednesday at 6:30. Thursday, the matchup game is Alden at East Aurora. So getting into Class C, their first Chuck Funky Bowl was Cleveland Hill. And maybe it's a matchup game. I don't know. No, it's a Chuck Funky. Cleve Hill beat Cassadaga Valley 46-14, so they're going to take on Fredonia this week, and I believe that's Chuck Funky at Cleve Hill, or Cleve Hill at Fredonia. I'll have to get a date on that. I believe that's tomorrow night, Wednesday night. We'll have to double check. But anyways, moving on. Chautauqua Lake with the big upset Saturday over JFK. To some, not to me. I knew Chautauqua Lake was coming in fast and furious. JFK, I saw them earlier in the year play Wilson. I thought they were okay. But this Chautauqua Lake team, they are tough, man. Rafajarian, is that how you pronounce it?
He's got over 1,000 yards.
Oh, yeah.
Number of touchdowns.
He's a beaut.
But they also shut down Jack Slayton, who has lit it up in previous games, and they're good defensively. So when you take a look at it, then now they're playing Southwestern, which they lost to, I think, by 35 points the first time they played them this season. Southwestern has only given up 45 yards, I think, defensively in 8 games, and they've been averaging 41 points a game. And I just think that the Trojans have an edge in that game big time. And now, and you look at the others, see Portville and Wilson will be an excellent game. Both teams have got extremely good talent, very physical. Portville's got, I think, 45 players on their team, so they got a lot of depth. They also have some studs on both sides. And Wilson has been close the last 2 years. I think in both years they lost in the last play of the game where they went for 2. And it'll be interesting to see how who wins that, because both would be love to be able to be playing at New Era Field.
Well, third time's the charm for Wilson, that last play of the game. And that scenario may happen again with Wilson having to go for 2 at the end of the game, because Portville is no joke. Josh Brooks is doing a phenomenal job with the Panthers. Jaden Lassiter is over 1,000 yards, 19 touchdowns. Dalton Tobola, 23 receptions for 437 yards, 4 touchdowns there. Lassiter has another 3 touchdowns receiving. He's also got 35 tackles. He's got a sack, a pick, 2 fumble returns, 2 fumble recoveries, 1 for a touchdown. So Portville's tough.
Billy Atlas, the coach, the quarterback and senior, had over 200 yards passing. And I haven't seen that during the season because they rely on the running game. So it'll be interesting to see what the coaches have planned on both sides.
And Wilson's had a very good year. And they got the brand new stadium up there. That's going to be the WNY Athletics Game of the Week. We're sending a crew up to Wilson to do that broadcast for Wilson and Portville, so that'll be on Mixer.com. Let's take a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment.
Hey, Josh Allen.
Hey, thanks for coming by.
Big fan.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm all about that teamwork.
Yeah, that's West Her. Get the right people, working together, making connections. In fact, show me what you got. I'm going along.
Really?
Made me work for it, but anything worth doing.
Listen, I know you're good at this TV deal, but maybe you should try the football thing.
Welcome back to High School Football Weekly. We're going to talk about the Class Ds now, and this segment is brought to you by A-Turf, who does all those awesome fields all around Western New York. Call the guys at A-Turf if you're looking to have your fields upgraded. So they were off last week, Class D, no games, but this week they started their playoffs. CSP is going to host Randolph. That's at Panama Saturday, 1:30. That's really the only Saturday game for Section 6. And Franklinville-Ellicottville gets Salamanca. So Chad Bartosek, the former coach from Franklinville-Ellicottville, is coming in with a brand new crop of kids from Salamanca, and they're gonna be asked to take down the number 1 team in Class D.
I think
what a story that would be if Bartosek comes in and wins, but that's tough.
I think the Titans and the Wolf Pack, I've been there right from the beginning. The Titans have won by a few touchdowns over, the Wolf Pack. But if you look at how well Gam Barmore and Garrett Hinsdale have played, particularly in the last few games, the Wolfpack are also moving Barmore around defensively. So I don't think if I'm the Titans, I'm going to go think that I'm going to do the same thing I did the first game and beat you pretty bad. They better come to play because they won a state championship last year. They know what it takes. That'll be a fun game at the stadium.
All Franklinville-Ellicottville needs to do is watch 2 years ago at the stadium when they played Maple Grove. They came in as, I don't want to say a heavy favorite, but they were definitely favored. They were the favorite to beat Maple Grove, who they beat earlier that season. They beat Maple Grove during the regular season, and we all thought that Kurt Fisher wasn't going to have the horses again to to win at the stadium to beat Franklinville-Elgeville. Well, Kurt's been around a while, and he's got a lot of tricks up his sleeve, and there's a reason why he's one of the all-time winning coaches here. And they beat Franklinville-Elgeville that game. And a lot of us were stunned, surprised, me included. I thought the Titans were going to win that game, and they didn't. So all they have to do is really take a look at their mindset, and they have to get ready. If they're, we assume Elgeville, Franklinville, the Titans, and CSP are going to meet up there. We assume that. But if they do, they better be ready to play. I think Jason Marsh will have those kids ready to go. It's his first time going there as a head coach. I'm sure he'll be pushing the right buttons and, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. They did beat, CSP this year 24-8 in the game. They pretty much dominated the line of scrimmage, and that's where we thought CSP was going to struggle the most. But that was week 3. It'll be week 9. You've played a number of teams since. You've had a number of practices to kind of get that line ready to go on the same page, working together as a cohesive unit. They will be much better on the line come week 10. They will. But as far as Franklinville-Elgeville goes offensively, we've talked about Logan Frank and Tyler Clear. Jordan Gernolds has 5 touchdowns. Nick Logel's got 4 touchdowns. He's also a key player on defense. Logel's got 4 sacks as well. Zach Wolford's got 29 tackles, 5 sacks, 2 fumble recoveries. And Wyatt Chuddy, 23 tackles, 3 picks. And Frank has 13 tackles and 2 picks. So they're pretty well balanced. They have wins over Allegheny Limestone. They've got a win over JFK. Those are 2 playoff teams from Class C. And, they definitely have a legit shot of winning Class D, but they will have CSP standing in the way.
Nicholas Lowell is 6'4", 240 pounds, very fast and very aggressive. His father played at Ithaca. His grandfather played for the Bills, so they have the football genes. It'll be interesting seeing how that plays out. When you take a look at all the games that will be playing in the semifinals, there's not that many matchups that are repeats. In past years, you might have 18 out of 20 involved in rematches. Not so much this year, particularly with some of the surprises. So it'll be interesting because one of the things, if you're going to make it to the stadium, you can't get caught up with all the aura and all the hype that goes with that. You just got to know what you have to do and do what you did the previous 9 games.
And I think it's fair to say that CSP might have had a little bit of that state championship hangover. They had a bit of a slow start, so to speak, but, the right players are peaking at the right time. You mentioned Hinsdale and Barmore, how well they've played. They've got some highlight reel touchdowns the last couple of weeks. Their game with Cleve Hill was a bit of a wake-up call, too. Cleve Hill came in, haven't really played well all year. It's a city school coming down, so to speak, coming down to kind of punch them in the mouth, if you will, and get physical. And they survived that challenge, and they had to, channel their whatever. They just had to really focus and come out, and they played a strong second half and pulled out the victory. That was a big win for CSP, and I think they can look back at that game of having to overcome adversity. They weren't able to do it against Franklinville-Elgeville. They were able to battle their demons in that adversity against Cleve Hill, and they've been on a roll since, and I expect Hinsdale and Barmore to have very good games this Saturday, the only game in town, and then we should see them at New Era Field once again. And any final thoughts on the show before we wrap up?
This is the fun part of the year. This is why the kids play all year round. They're lifting, they're running, they're trying to get better, and the coaches are looking at the way that they can win and how much effort it's going to take. So don't be looking to get to the stadium as much as to defeat the team that you're playing with, because you're going to be in for smash mouth football, because everyone wants a prize of being able to play New Era. My son played there for Williamsville South back in the 80s, and it was the first time they ever went to the stadium. And for you to be able to be a parent and sit at, back then, at Ralph Wilson Field, it might have even been another name before that, but just be able to sit there and just to watch your son play on the same carpet as the Bills, just, unbelievable. And every day during that school week was something going on, and it was just brought the community together, and it was just a fun time to be a parent, to be a player, to be a Billy.
And you just think of the legends that played there. Jim Kelly, John Elway, Joe Montana, Dan Marino, some of the greats, Ben Roethlisberger, Tom Brady. I mean, you just think of the Jerry Rices, Marcus Allen.
Jim Dombrowski.
Yes. Okay. Fred Smirlis. Reggie White, Randall Cunningham. Some of the greatest players that ever lived played there, and then you get a chance to watch your own son. That's just unbelievable. But, this is still one of the greatest magazines ever, and hopefully we can get this back one day. You'll never know. We'll work at it. Maybe we can bring that back for maybe on a monthly scale. Maybe we could do it on a monthly level. Unless we get some advertisers, we'll have to see. I wanted to get your thoughts on this before we close. At the seating meeting last Sunday, it was proposed by the chairman, Ken Stolt, that they may be going back to leagues. So you would have the NFL, Niagara Frontier League, just like they do with all the other sports. You wouldn't be divided up by class, so to speak, not until playoffs. But you would go into your leagues, your NFL, your Niagara Orleans, Cattaraugus County, ECIC, Buffalo. What would your take be on that? Do you see a lot more pros than cons going back to that concept?
I don't know. To be honest with you, I think that whatever the federation and the chairman decide and the coaches, that's the best way to go. They know better. They know where they live. They know what's required of them. And I think one of the questions that I would ask is, why all of a sudden are you considering this? What's driving this? And is it the coaches, is it the ADs, whatever? And you got to listen to the people who are there every day at the school and in the communities.
I believe there's a lot of pros and cons. One of the pros, obviously, is you will save a lot of money with travel. I think that's probably Dick, that's the driving force. It's probably money behind it. The taxpayers are fitting the bill, and maybe they could see some savings there on having to pay for your school to drive. Olean having to go all the way up to Wilson and further, Newfane. Those are a lot of miles on those schools.
Kids Escaping Drugs has been around since 1987, 1990. And they have, for the last 10, 15 years, run a summit for kids in the schools in Western New York. They've got good attendance, tremendous feedback, and a lot of good sponsors. This year, the schools will not pay for the buses that would require taking the kids to the summit, which you have in Hamburg and you have maybe in Williamsville as locations. You look at that and say, who's minding the store? This is 2019, not 1819. When you take a look at the opiate crisis, etc., and then to say, okay, we spent $23 million in Williamsville to renovate all the facilities in the 3 schools and campuses, and now we can't afford X dollars to be able to transport our kids to get education that they need on a subject that is one of the main problems in today's society. So when you look at it, when the way schools operate, you never know. That's my homily for the day, for the weekend.
Well, we'll take that and a bunch more. We'll be back next week for Week 10, but we won't be here. We're actually going to be at New Era Field. That's where you'll see us next for Media Day.
Yep,
we'll see you out there.
Tuesday.
Yeah, Tuesday. Let me know if you need a ride. I'll be happy to take you out there.
9 o'clock, 9:30.
All right. For Dick Gallagher of WGRZ High School Sports, I'm Frank Wolf from WNY Athletics. See you next week, everybody.
WNYathletics.com is the premier high school sports website in Western New York, providing the best sports coverage of Section 6 and Monsignor Martin leagues. Check out our page for daily game recaps and late-breaking sports news. Our online scoreboards are updated in real time. Never miss a goal or touchdown. Visit WNYathletics.com today or follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube.